Were UNSC frigates in Halo just bad? Did their design hold back humanity and bring the Covenant to the edge of victory? That's what we'll be discussing in today's video. Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another video. We're going to continue some of our coverage of the greater Halo universe in the lead up to Halo Infinite by taking a look at what I think is one of the coolest looking ship types in popular science fiction, the UNSC Frigate. Now, in reality, there were actually several frigate classes used by the UNSC. During the war, there was the Charon class, the Paris class, and the Stalwart class. Then after the war, humanity also created two advanced frigate classes called the Strident and the We're going to be talking more about the wartime frigates of the UNSC for today's video, i.e. the Charon, Paris, and Stalwart, because they're far more relevant to the overall story, with the UNSC and Amberclad and Forward Unto Dawn being Stalwart and Charon class frigates respectively, but also because, to be fair to humanity, they did rectify some of the issues with the frigate class as a whole that we'll be discussing today. Regarding the differences between the specific classes, I don't necessarily think that's super important to go into for today's video. They're all sort of permutations of the same design. The Paris class is the heaviest of the UNSC frigate types. The Charon was made more for ground support, and the Stalwart seemed to be a mix of both. And the Paris, by the way, is actually significantly larger than the other frigate types, but I think we can just sort of lump them all together and discuss them like that. So the question of were UNSC frigates bad is a tough one. Were they bad for their originally designed roles? Maybe not, but these ships really suffered during the Human Covenant War. Ideally, UNSC frigates would be escorts for much larger vessels, marathons and above. That way they can provide extra fire support, and their thin armor compared to larger capital ships doesn't need to take as much direct fire because there are more important targets, obviously. However, because of how the war was going for humanity, a lot of times single or packs of frigates were forced to engage the Covenant, and that almost always went extraordinarily badly for the UNSC. Even the Paris, which is the heaviest frigate, again, is relatively lightly armed compared to a true UNSC cruiser. For comparison, the Paris is 535 meters long. It uses 60 centimeter thick battle plating, while the Marathon, which is closer to a true battleship, is 1200 meters long and has almost 200 centimeter thick battle plating. So practically during warfare, that is a knock against the UNSC frigate. There's no Covenant ship, literally none larger than a dropship, that this thing has a chance of beating in single combat. Its general design also makes it particularly vulnerable when other larger ships aren't soaking up the fire. That's because UNSC frigates were based on the idea that these are essentially fast-moving weapons platforms. They have relatively light max compared to larger ships, max being magnetic accelerator cannons, and have thinner armor. So ideally you want these things contributing fire to an enemy while not taking shots themselves. This was actually one general weakness of UNSC's strategy. They were built around knocking out their enemy. Max put out a lot of damage but then had to recharge. The UNSC struggled against the Covenant because their large capital ships could absorb the first round and then hit back against the UNSC with plasma weapons, which were almost always fatal with a single blow. So yeah, in a lot of space battles against the Covenant, frigates just got slagged really easily, and not only that, but the Covenant would take out entire swaths of them. That being said, when it comes to overall design, unlike something like a Star Destroyer, which even in universe you can pick holes with, I do think UNSC frigates are well-made ships. There's a real economy of design here. Every aspect of the ship has purpose. The frigate is dominated by twin boons. The top one is used for fire control, computing systems, and more, while the lower boon houses most of the Mac itself. When you look at Halo Warfleet, and when we talk about something especially like the Paris, you can tell that every inch of the ship is built around the magnetic accelerator cannon, which makes sense. Again, these are supposed to be very light ships which can contribute Mac fire. So where you can put extra, say, reactor capacity or whatever else to recharge the Mac quicker, that's basically what's being done to the expense of other things like extra armor or redundant systems. UNSC frigates were also covered with anti-ship weapons, whether that's archer missiles or anti-fighter weapons, and really the true configurability came depending on the ship class. Paris-class frigates used any additional space, usually to house long swords to help during space combat. Charons, like the Forward Unto Dawn, obviously had those very large troop deployment bays, and the Stalwart probably had a mix of the two. I actually really like how the UNSC takes one design and makes 3 different permutations. By the end of the war, it does put humanity in a bit of a tough spot. Like, I think at the Ark, the humans would have rather have a Paris class than a Charon class, but to be honest, either one will get slagged by a Covenant warship that feels like giving it any attention. So I guess it is what it is. One of my other problems with frigates is that the UNSC, in my opinion, overused them compared to the destroyer, which in most situations seems like a superior ship. The destroyer's main downside is that it lacks some of the pure maneuverability and speed of a frigate, but seems to be pretty fast in its own right, at least according to Commander Keyes, who I think knows his stuff. According to the Fall of Reach, and I quote, "Unlike the frigates that Commander Keyes had toured before, the Meriwether Lewis and Midsummer Night, the frigate was a destroyer. She was almost as heavy as both these vessels combined, but was only 7 meters longer. Some in the fleet thought the massive ships were unwieldy, too slow and cumbersome. What those critics forgot was that a UNSC destroyer sported 2 MAC guns, 26 oversized archer missile pods, and 3 nuclear warheads. Unlike other fleet ships, she carried no single fighters. Instead, her extra mass came from nearly 2 meters of titanium A battleplate armor that covered her from stem to stern. The Iroquois could dish out and take a tremendous amount of punishment." I think Halo Warfleet says it quite well. These vessels lack the sort of multi-purpose utility of some frigates, but make up for it with cruiser-level armor and nearly cruiser-level firepower. If I'm in the unfortunate situation where I have to take on a Covenant ship head-to-head, I'm choosing a destroyer 10 times out of 10. Other than that, generally when talking about frigates, I mean, there were some small quips that I would make. For example, UNSC ships as a whole, not just the frigate class, had the bridge in the most obvious place. Halo Warfleet says that this is a sort of callback to traditional naval history, but we're fighting space battles now. Put the bridge inside of the ship, use cameras and whatnot. If you're relying on your actual visual sight in the Halo universe, you're dead anyway. Covenant ships did this, and I think it was very, very smart. So to summarize, were UNSC frigates bad? I don't think that's necessarily fair. What I do think is that they were put in a role that was pretty inappropriate for their original design. But humanity was desperate, they were going to lose the war anyway, no frigate was going to save them, although some did serve as very good carriers for Master Chief. But guys, that's all I have for today. Until next time, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.